This edition of Mac Voices is brought to you by Drobo, smart storage that grows with you and protects what matters. Get 10% off your Drobo at drobostore.com using the offer code MV10. Welcome to Mac Voices. This is the Talk of the Mac community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, it's time for another Take Control book. It's time for another Take Control author. That would have to be Mr. Joe Kissell. Joe, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming back.
Nice to be here. It seems like we haven't talked since last year. I mean, is that even possible?
Well, considering this is February, yeah, that's possible, but it seems unlikely, I admit.
I mean, it's so unusual for an entire month to go by without, a new book from me that needs some discussion.
Yeah, well, I'm just glad there is one now, and of course we've got Macworld iWorld coming up in a few weeks, and you'll be back again before that to talk about what you're doing there.
Absolutely.
This time, though, we've got a new book. It's a new title. It's, as I understand it, it's kind of a conglomeration or combining of previous books. Take Control of Apple Mail this time.
Right. Yeah, in a way, it's a conglomeration. So one of my first Take Control books is the second or third book that I wrote back in 2003 or 2004 was about Apple Mail. And back then we were talking, Panther. And I wrote a book about Apple Mail. I wrote a book about spam. Those were originally going to be one book, and then we realized, wow, this is a really long book, so we split them into two books. And then I kept updating the Apple Mail book as each new version of OS X came out. I think we might have skipped one somewhere along the way, but usually I'd update them for every new version. And then I started writing a series of books on iOS Mail as well. And this has been a sort of normal pattern, like Apple updates OS X, Apple updates iOS, and I come out with new versions of these books. Well, a few things happened differently back, in October. We have iOS 7 coming out, we have Mavericks coming out. And the first thing was, as I'm sure everyone will recall vividly, Apple Mail in Mavericks just wasn't very good especially at the beginning. Even now, not so much, but it got off to a really rough start. And it was especially bad for people who are using Gmail. And so I wrote tidbits articles about this, and it was this big thing.
And as I recall, you weren't cranky at all about that.
No, not at all. I turned into a jolly green giant, or something.
Or something.
But no, so that was a big thing. And I was my first impression of Mail and Mavericks was like, I'm not going to write a book about this. This sucks. This is awful. And so anyway, I was busy working on other Take Control books and doing Mac Mini Cruise and other kinds of stuff. So there was a delay in just sort of mental space to be able to say, okay, now we're going to figure out what we're going to do about this. But as I was talking about it with Tanya and just thinking through the many changes in iOS 7 Mail, the many changes in Mavericks Mail, we realized a couple of things. One is we really hate having to update two different books every time Apple does their now yearly OS updates, because they're really quite big projects. And frankly, most of our audience has both platforms anyway. So one thing we wanted to do was to combine those two, previously two books into one. But a second thing we realized is that a lot of what's in the previous books is just really dull. It's boring. It's they're sort of instruction manual-ish. How to what are the procedures you have to go through to check for new mail? Well, of course I have to have 2 paragraphs about that. And how do you find the preferences window? And how do I delete a message? And I hate writing this stuff because it's boring. It's so dull. And I don't think anybody likes reading it either. We just felt like there's an obligation to be complete. And this time around, we decided to sort of let go of that obligation. We decided, our audience gets it by now. You folks are smart enough to know how to check for new email and delete messages and do basic things like that. You don't need me to tell you that. And frankly, Mail's built-in help is okay. It's pretty good for basic kinds of stuff. What you need my help with is the stuff that Apple doesn't tell you. The stuff that is weird or confusing or broken, or you can't quite grasp what Apple's logic is, or you don't know how to do a certain task, or there are controls that should be there but they seem to be hidden. those kinds of things, and especially with the new unpleasantness in Mavericks Mail. So that was the approach we took with this book. There is some old recycled content in there, but mainly it's a new book that is how to get important, useful stuff done in these two apps, Mail for OS X, Mail for iOS, how to deal with as many problems as I have a way to deal with, how to understand Apple's logic to the extent that I understand it, how to find features you might not have been able to find otherwise, and beyond that, how to do, how to think about email management as a task, how to deal with inbox overflow, how to be a better correspondent, how to make sure that your replies and forwards and sending attachments works not just for you, but also for the people receiving your email. So it's a really very different approach. It is still about those two programs, but it is really trying to be less of an instruction manual and more of a take control. This is how you do useful stuff with these tools.
I like this approach. I think there's a time and a place at this point in people's computing lives. There's a time and a place to kind of abandon, well, not abandon, but categorize the basics to a category called the basics and move on. Michael Cohen was here not too long ago talking about take control of pages. And because of the pages rewrite, I think it's completely appropriate that he go back and address some of the basic things because a lot of them have changed or moved. But Apple Mail really hasn't changed or moved a lot of things. And the ones that it has, that's where you start to pick up and go.
Well, one of the first things I did in the book was, if you haven't really studied this closely, here's a list of what's new in Mavericks Mail, here's a list of what's new in iOS 7 Mail. And okay, so if you open Mail and go to the help menu, there's what's new command, and it lists 3 or 4 things. But actually there are dozens of new things. And a lot of them Apple just doesn't bother to mention. There are a lot of changes in behavior that, some of them are very good, and some of them are really awful. And some of them are just kind of why on earth would they do that? But there's a lot in there that nobody tells you about. So even just cataloging the changes, superficially, Mavericks and Mountain Lion Mail look almost identical. But once you start digging in, you're like, wow, this is kind of more different than I thought. So that's part of the service I provide, is cluing you into these things that Apple isn't going to bother cluing you into.
So let's talk a little bit, and of course we can't redo the book here, as we always issue that kind of disclaimer. But
Chapter 1. Yeah. I'll do a dramatic reading.
What are some of the things that folks need to be aware of from the standpoint of gotchas, I guess, of things that really could impede their productivity with Mail?
Well, not to beat a dead horse, but Gmail is still a problem. Now, Apple, as I have said numerous times before, Apple dramatically changed the way Mail interacts with Gmail, and I can tell that they are really trying. They really want to make the experience better. They really want to solve problems that have existed for a long time, and I applaud them for that. So I know that their heart is in the right place. It's just that they have fallen down on a lot of implementation details. And it could be that by the time this interview is, released, Apple comes out with an update to OS X, and many or all of these problems are fixed. It could happen. Historically, Apple seems to watch and wait to release an update until the day after I write a book about something, and then they immediately push out that update so that my book is updated. So I'm kind of expecting that. But anyway. What I'm saying is, as of 10.9.1, anyhow, the Gmail experience leaves a lot to be desired still. There are some problems with Exchange too, although most of the Exchange problems aren't particularly new. They have been mostly around for a while. If you are using iCloud, it's pretty good. If you're using a run-of-the-mill IMAP account, it's pretty good. Nothing really to complain about. And all the the variants like Yahoo and AOL and those sorts of things, they're really, there's no particular problem. There's still a lot of weirdness, but Gmail is still a sore spot. There's a long list of other things that could be gotchas. depending on your point of view. So here's just one that I think a lot of people will go, I don't care. But for me, it's a big deal. So it used to be that there was a hidden preference. So you'd have to go into terminal and type a little, defaults right, blah, blah, blah command to turn this on. But it was there, and you could turn on this preference. And what this preference meant was, please display the plain text version of incoming messages instead of the styled text version. That way, you can pick what font and what size looks good for you, and you don't have to worry that somebody's going to send you a message in 28-point red, Comic Sans or something ridiculous, which does happen. That does happen, and you get to control how your text looks. And then there were menu commands where you could say, no, show me the HTML version of this instead, or show me the plain text version, or just pick the best version. You could switch among them. So that was really nice. I appreciated being able to have the choice to display incoming messages in plain text if I preferred. That choice isn't there anymore, and those menu commands to switch between the different versions of messages aren't there anymore. So I have preached the virtues of plain text for a long time, both for incoming messages and for outgoing messages. But now I find I just don't have that option. Apple has taken that away from me, and I'm very sad about that. It's not the end of the world, and people who never bothered with changing that preference will never know the difference. But it's one of those things that just sort of gets added to the list of wish it weren't like that.
Joe, what is it with Gmail and Apple Mail? Is it Apple trying to exert their will toward Gmail? Or is it Gmail trying to exert its will toward Apple Mail? Or is it just a situation where Apple hasn't or can't or won't write Apple Mail to work with Gmail properly?
I'm of two minds about this. So on the one hand, the blame, and blame might be too strong a word, but the onus is on Google, because Google designed Gmail as a web email experience. IMAP was an afterthought. IMAP was tacked on later. And when Google got around to adding IMAP to Gmail, they realized it's a round peg square hole kind of problem. You can't sort of map all of Gmail's functions onto all of IMAP's functions and have them work out. So they were obligated to make some compromises. Either we're going to keep the web experience that so many people like and have those features and cripple IMAP a bit, or we cripple all the web experience in order to make IMAP robust. And Google, quite sensibly, I think, chose to do IMAP in what I will charitably call a non-standard way. Now, having made that choice, I would have made different specific implementation details about, choices about how they mapped Gmail features onto IMAP or not. But that was just sort of the basic problem is Gmail started with two things that didn't quite fit together, and then they made matters, in my opinion, worse by the particular design choices they made. Now, on Apple's side, if Apple had come up with a Gmail account type from the get-go, like as soon as Google added IMAP support to Gmail, if Apple had said, okay, let's get right on this, and let's design an email client that works just beautifully and seamlessly with Gmail, that would have been great. But they didn't. They just said, it's an IMAP client, it's an IMAP server. We'll treat it like any other IMAP server, and that was terrible because, again, the assumptions were out of line. So, I wrote this article a number of years ago with this massive, 21-step process that you could go through to fiddle with some stuff in Gmail and fiddle with some stuff in Mail to make the two coexist as happily as could be. And that was really necessary back then to have a good experience. Now, what Apple has done in Mavericks, which is, again, a good thing, is they have tried to make all of that unnecessary. They have tried to now say, okay, let's figure this out and let's really do the right thing and treat Gmail in a special way, not as an ordinary IMAP client, but meet it on its own terms. And in so doing, they have solved a lot of the problems that previously required lots of workarounds. So that's great. It's just that they didn't go far enough. There are a lot of Gmail features that still aren't supported in Apple Mail, like priority inbox, which a lot of people really love. It isn't a thing in Gmail categories, and the important label and stuff like that. It's also not impossible, but it's awkward to, on the Gmail website, you can apply multiple labels to a message. That's easy, it's no problem. You can do that in Mail, but it's not very convenient to do that because you have to basically copy. It looks like you're copying a message to multiple mailboxes. And then there are all kinds of little details that it just looks to me like nobody ever thought through. For example, I used to have this very big, elaborate Apple script that would look to do important stuff for me based on messages in various Gmail mailboxes. But ever since Mavericks has come out, that Apple script has failed because from Apple Script's point of view, every Gmail mailbox, except for your inbox and sent and those special mailboxes, is empty. You go into, you have a mailbox and, label on the Gmail website, mailbox and mail. It's called example, and you go into there, and hey, I can see messages in there in Mail, and you say, hey, AppleScript, tell me how many messages are in this mailbox, and it'll say 0. So, this is something I submitted a bug report months and months ago. I hope it'll be fixed. But there are just sort of a lot of rough edges like that, and there were enough of them that I decided to stop using Gmail as my primary provider. I still have a Gmail account, but it's not my main account anymore. And I switched to a conventional IMAP provider because it was either that or switch away from Apple Mail and find a new email client. And that's a reasonable choice too, except that I have Mail like really heavily customized with 9 different plugins and all sorts of, the Apple script, all this stuff that has made it just work just right for me. And out of all the other email apps I've tried, I haven't found one that can be customized to the point where it is as powerful for me, for what I need to do as Mail. So it's Google's fault, it's Apple's fault, it's nobody's fault, it is what it is, but my personal way of handling this is to say, there were enough things that were bugging me about Gmail anyway. This is kind of the last straw. I'll just go back to regular IMAP.
This edition of MacVoices is brought to you by Drobo, smart storage that grows with you and protects what matters. Get 10% off your Drobo at drobostore.com using the offer code MV10. Today I want to talk about my favorite Drobo, the Drobo 5D. The 5D comes with both USB 3.0 and Thunderbolt connections, and it is FAST fast. USB 3.0 is great, but Thunderbolt puts the 5D in a class by itself. As you might guess, I'm editing a lot of video. No, I'm not a professional editor, but when you start putting together a video show with 4 different guests, then add a combined shot, you're effectively managing 8 video tracks at once. When encoded as ProRes, each stream runs around 18 to 20 gigs or so. By most standards, that's a lot of data to work with. The Drobo 5N lets me work faster and smoother than ever before. If you want an even bigger speed boost, and I did, drop an mSATA SSD drive in as a cache, and it really screams. Benchmarks are great, but I'm more interested in real-world performance and how it affects what I do. And I can tell you that the Drobo 5D is the best thing I've found to improve my productivity. Sure, you could buy another Thunderbolt drive or even a Thunderbolt RAID system, but you wouldn't get Drobo's Beyond RAID technology that protects you from drive failures. And nothing ruins your day quite like a failed drive that takes your data with it. You also wouldn't get Drobo's ease of expandability and flexible upgrades when you need more space, and all of the other great features that make a Drobo a Drobo. Okay, so you don't edit video, but I bet you have a large photo library that's getting larger all the time, or an iTunes library that continues to grow. or maybe a home video library that you want to save and protect. Probably all three. Get the Drobo Advantage. Get your Drobo at drobostore.com and get an extra 10% off with the code MV10. Either way, tweet me at Chuck Joyner with the hashtag Drobo4MV to let me know that you've joined the Drobo family. We'll welcome you with open arms. Drobo, smart storage that grows with you and protects what matters. Thanks to Drobo for sponsoring this edition of MacVoices. You know somebody's going to ask. If you'd rather not say, that's fine. But you switched away from Gmail. What IMAP provider are you using now?
Well, I did a lot of soul searching about this, and this is not news, by the way, because I've already written about it for Macworld. There are a lot of people that like Fastmail. There are a lot of people that like, you name it. There are tons of IMAP providers out there. Microsoft has theirs, and do a web search on IMAP provider and you'll come up with tons of options. So I looked at a lot of these. A lot of them are their sort of main claim to fame is, oh well, we're based outside the United States, so we're not under the court orders and subpoenas and NSA blah 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 doesn't apply to us. And I'm like, okay, but I'm sure for some people that's really important, and I do know a thing about this too because I book on online privacy, but really that wasn't my main concern. My main concern was, does it have the features I need? Is it at a reasonable price? And can I set it up easily? So one of the things that came up in my search for an alternative IMAP provider was EasyDNS. So EasyDNS is a Canadian company that provides DNS services. And I've used them for 10 years or so for DNS services for my various domains. It turns out I was already paying them for their whatever DNS Pro service, I think it's called, that includes IMAP and webmail as one of its features. I just never bothered to turn it on because I had a Gmail account. So I turned it on, and it took half a dozen clicks to basically say, no, stop sending my email to Google and start sending it to here. And it was really, really easy to set up. It's inexpensive. It has the features I need. The spam filtering isn't as good. So just put that out there. And it doesn't have as generous storage space as Google has. But it's working really well for me. And it was effectively free for me because I was already paying for the service that includes this as an attribute. So I don't know that I'll stick with them forever, but they've been fine. I've been happy with them. They are communicative. I know they have a lot of really neat new features in the works they've told me about. So easydns.com or .ca, I don't know. And if you get domain name service from them, then email comes with the package.
That's good to know. And I think there are a lot of those the domain services that include an email account or email capabilities in their packages. So that's great advice. Go and check and see what you're already paying for that you may not be using. See if it works. I'm sticking with Gmail, and you and I've had plenty of conversations about this because it works for me. What I wish they would do, though, is I wish everybody would start looking at Gmail as its own standard. Now, we can debate the merits of that as to whether it's a good idea for Google to be able to create a standard, but at the end of the day, if you just say, okay, this is Gmail, and these are the extra features that it supports beyond IMAP, and treat it that way, but everybody seems to try to squeeze it into the IMAP.
You raise a very valid point. What Google could do, and perhaps should do, is to say, no, don't use IMAP, use GMAP. We're gonna create a new set of APIs with which a client can communicate with our servers, and that give you all the features that don't try to put that round peg in a square hole. So Google could do that, but they probably won't. And the reason they probably won't is that they really prefer that you use a web browser or one of these browser-based apps, because a client like Apple Mail isn't going to show you ads. A web page will. I mean, some vast majority of Google's income is from ad revenues. That's their bread and butter. So, of course, they want to encourage things that will get you to look at ads and discourage behaviors that will let you avoid the ads. So, I mean, you can agree or disagree with that approach, but that's what makes me think it's unlikely that they're going to go to any special effort to make it easy to, for a third-party client to get at all of that, Google goodness.
And you know what? That's fine, because Gmail is free. And, we're into the whole discussion, and we could go off for an hour on, how the different ways you are paying for things, whether you're paying with cash, whether you're paying with your information, whether you're paying with your eyeballs, however you do it. But yeah, I agree with you. I think that just the world we live in, there's a practical reason for them not to do that. There's an incentive for them not to. So
right. That's
life. But I find it interesting that you've been able to customize Apple Mail to that degree. And I hope that this is part of the book, but can you give me just a couple quick examples of the customizations you've done? Are we talking about filtering? Are we talking about plugins? What are we talking about?
Sure. So I have, I have a chapter on customizing Mail, and it includes things, everything from, different toolbar buttons and fields and controls that you can display or hide, to different, using the classic view versus the new sort of 3-column view that debuted a couple of OSs ago. To plugins, and also keyboard shortcuts, which there's lots of useful information about those as well. For me, plugins are really the biggest thing, and I use 9 of them at the moment. I wrote an article for Macworld about those 9 plugins, and I'm hoping that article is published before the book comes out, so that I can just say, read this article. I don't know if that timing will have aligned, but anyway, really soon there will be an article in Macworld about the 9 plugins that I use. And I have my favorites. Dan Frakes, who edited this book, has his favorites. I'll just mention a few of them. The one that I feel like I really, really, really could not live without is called Mail.app. It's by another Canadian developer called InDev. And this developer makes, I think, 3 different plugins. Mail Tags is another one that they make that I use. Mail.app is a really cool utility that lets you. Well, what I like it best for is that it lets me file things from the keyboard. So you can come up with various kinds of keyboard shortcuts that let you file any message in any mailbox without having to go to menus or use the mouse or any of that kind of stuff. So that's one really cool thing. It also has it sort of extends Mail's rules. So normally rules operate when a message comes in, and only when a message comes in. But what Mail.app lets you do is create any sort of rule, any number of rules that apply only when you press a certain keystroke. So there is a command in Mail that says, okay, even though this message is already in my inbox, go ahead and apply all of my rules to it. So that exists, but what doesn't exist is the ability to apply just one rule. And that's what Mail.app gives you. So you can have a rule that says, if this message happens to be from Chuck Joyner, file it in my most important email folder. And I have a keystroke. So I just finished reading a message from you, and I don't, I just pressed, a couple of keystrokes, and it says, oh, was this message from Chuck? Put it in the Chuck folder. But also, let's say I have another rule like that files any message from my wife in the wife folder, and any message from my mom in the mom folder, and any message from Adam in the Adam folder. I don't exactly do that, but we're just pretending here. I can assign the same keystroke to all of them. So what I really do is I finish reading a message and like, okay, I want to file this, but I don't want to just put it in my archive mailbox. I want to put it in the mailbox that I really want it to go in. So I press my keystroke that basically means do the right thing, and it goes through my Mail Act On rules, and it says, oh, is this from Chuck? Then it would go in the Chuck folder. No, that's not from Chuck. It's from my mom. That goes in the mom folder. So and it can also run rules as you are in the process of sending messages and like tons of other stuff. So Mail Act On, I love it to pieces. I can't possibly use mail without it. Very, very fond of it. Another this is an old favorite, but since I stopped using Gmail, I've had to really lean very heavily on Spam Sieve. So if you need spam filtering that goes beyond Mail's built-in sort of meager capabilities, and your ISP or email provider isn't doing enough for you, Spam Sieve is a bomb, man. It's the best, and I would be lost without it. So there are 7 more, and they all do cool stuff. You can read about them, but I just have little tweaks, like one to correct the way Mail does its quoting, so that things are in the right order, and another one to fix the way you follow up on existing email messages, and another one to deal with to customize the way Mail handles attachments. So there are a lot of ways in which Mail by itself just really doesn't do the right thing as far as I'm concerned, but with my customizations, perfect.
Do you have any concerns, Joe, going forward about Apple maintaining the quality of its email client? And I find it interesting that you switched from Gmail. Well, you switched your mailbox from Gmail. You really didn't switch your client, and
no.
And that could be a traumatic thing to change your email client.
Oh yeah, it can be. And I've received so many emails and comments on articles I've written. Oh well, why don't you just use and fill in the name of a program? And there are lots of other apps for iOS, lots of other apps for OS X that are really quite good email clients, and I have a lot of them. I've tried out many of them, and it's not that they're not bad, but the thing is, everybody's needs are different. Everybody's personality is different. I mean, we've had this conversation before. The technique I use to handle my incoming email and to keep it under control works perfectly for me. I mean, right now, there are 2 messages in my inbox, and one of those came in since we started this conversation. So, it's under control. Now, Adam Engst uses a utterly different approach, and I could not use his approach for 10 minutes. It would drive me bonkers. I can't even conceive, and he couldn't use my approach for 10 minutes either. We have both individually sat down and thought about the kinds of messages we receive and how we like to use email, and we figured out this is the approach that's going to work for me. So when it comes to I really love this other email client. It's so great. It's great for me. I'm like, I'm glad. Be happy. Use it. If it's great for you because it fits your personality and your needs, blessings upon you. But for me, I think about email a certain way. I have certain things that I must be able to do with my email client, and certain things I don't care about at all. And Mail is currently the best fit for me. So it's a matter of choosing the client that's the best fit, and also choosing the technique that works best for your particular needs. And those are, I don't talk about other clients really much in the book, but I do talk about how to come up with an email management technique that's effective for you.
And that's the key, I think. That's brilliant, because so many people don't really sit down and think about email. They sort of have developed whatever they do with it over time. Some people, in fact, I have a friend who, I'm kind of horrified at this, their version of an inbox is to just leave everything in the inbox. It's either read or it's not, and it just lays there. And the last time I looked, she had 29,000 messages.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know if you can see. There is a little metal basket on this desk behind me. It has 2 or 3 pieces of paper in it now. That's my inbox, my physical inbox. And stuff comes in there, and then I read it, and I scan it, or I file it, or I shred it, or I do whatever with it. But then it leaves the inbox. And if I just put every piece of mail that I got in there and stacked it up to the ceiling, then it's not an inbox. It's a really, really awful filing cabinet. Yeah. So the main, and the main problem I have actually with people who keep everything in their inbox is, how do you tell which of the messages that you have read you still need to do something with and which you don't? Because it's not just a matter of read or unread. I will read a message and think, I can't do anything about this right now because I need an hour this afternoon, and I don't want to use that read or unread flag to signal two different things. It has to either signal that this needs more work, or signal that it's unread. It can't really do double duty. That's too confusing, and it makes too much work for me. So that's the real problem I have with keeping everything in your inbox, is it prevents you from being able to make that distinction. So at the very least, I say, once you are done with a message, you've replied if you need to reply, you've absorbed the information, you really don't need it anymore, put it somewhere that's not your inbox. Put it in your archive, delete it, put it in one big, I don't care what you do with it, just get it out of your inbox so that your inbox really is an inbox. Now, again, this is how I feel, and there are people who have a different approach, and I'm not going to say they're wrong, although they are. No, I'm just saying, what I identified was something that would be really inefficient for me. I don't ever want to have to ask myself, wait a minute, did I read this message before? Does this, because I can't rely on just that read unread flag. Did I read that already? And if so, does that need more effort? I want to deal with the message and never have to look at it or think about it again. So that's what works best for me. If your brain is wired different, then more power to you.
Yeah, but think about it. And if you haven't thought about it, or you can't think about it or whatever, then, get Joe's book and follow his advice, as far as you can take it, because Joe has obviously spent a lot of time thinking about this. And I think there are a lot of things in computing, in personal computing, that habits we've developed over the years, and we don't stop to think there's a better way to do it. We've all seen those users, that we try to help out. They open a program, and then they close it to go open another one. It's like, well, why don't you just, we can open and go open. Oh, well, no, I couldn't, because then I get confused. Well, okay, if that's fine. I mean, that if it works for you, and it feels like you're driving a car stuck in first gear, but if that's the way you want it, then that's fine. Yes,
I have these sorts of discussions with loved ones quite frequently. But I wrote this article for Tidbits last year. And the gist of it was, it's not email that's the problem, it's you. And it was basically saying, if you're having trouble with email, that's okay. People have trouble with email. That's nothing to be ashamed of. But don't blame email as a medium. Don't blame your email provider. Don't blame your email client. Blame yourself for not having sat down and thought through your email needs. Because, gnomes aren't going to magically appear in the night and answer all of your email for you. It is, you can delete things, you can reply to things, you can file things, but if you want to be in control of your email, you have to take charge of your email. It requires a decision and a commitment and some sort of a strategy. And if you haven't either come up with your own strategy or adopted someone else's that you like, that's kind of on you. So I echo those sentiments in this book.
Joe, there's some interviews that we do about your books that are good discussions, and there's some that are just packed full of information. And then there's some like this that I think they feel like they border on a therapy session.
Tell me how you really feel. I'm listening.
Yes. Well, tell me how you really feel. I think that I didn't mean it was my therapy, Joe. I meant it was yours.
Well, that is actually part of it. I write books to okay, it's like this. People send me email all the time because they're frustrated about something. They're having trouble with something. And I try to help when I can. I don't always have the time. I don't always have the answers, but I try to do what I can. When I get the same question 2 or 3 or 4 times, I start thinking to myself, let's write an article about this, or let's write a book about this, so that I don't have to keep answering the same questions over and over again. And when I'm not only solving a problem somebody else is having, but it's a problem that I myself am having, you've read my stuff. I don't just say, now here are the answers to the question. I rant. I do. It's cathartic.
Yeah.
And so I do take some words in the book to say, and this is just stupid, and I can't believe Apple did such a wacky thing, But I'm doing this partly as the therapy, partly as I got that off my chest, but also partly to say, I'll bet you've noticed this too, and I'll bet it's bugged you too, but you didn't know if it was just you. Well, it's not just you. It's you, and it's me, and it's a lot of other people. It's not your fault. And so I try to do both. I try to provide, get those rants out, get the stuff off my chest in my books, but also help other people to see that it's not just them.
And I think now we're having some fun here, but I think there's a value to that, because you're right. If I pick up something in an article by you where I've had that frustration, maybe it hasn't boiled over, but it's like that, itch under the skin that you just can't, get rid of, and it just keeps coming back. And then I see you expressing, a bit more frustration. It kind of winds me up a little bit, and also makes me want to go and fix it so I don't have it anymore. So I think there's some real value to it. So please feel free to rant away anytime.
So do you think I should start charging therapists rates? Because, you can get, like, you buy a book for $10 or $15 and you get hours of therapy out of that. But, if you think it would be more fair to pay me a couple $100 an hour for my time, that would be okay. You're allowed to pay more for the books.
I think there are a couple things here. I think, first of all, that you could hire or start a Joe Kissell consulting service for a bit more than the price of a book, but you would have to provide the couch.
With a few hours of consulting, I can buy a couch.
Okay, it works. So Joe, how much would it cost us to get this version, this particular therapy session?
Well, if you have not bought any of my previous books on Apple Mail, either for OS X or for iOS 7, this book is going to cost you $15. It's I don't know the exact page count. It's somewhere around 180 pages, so it's good and meaty. And that's not 180 pages of like diagrams and screenshots and things. It's pretty dense, very large. There are illustrations, but it's mostly text. So it's quite a bit of information for $15. If, however, you did have one of my older books on Apple Mail for OS X or Apple Mail for iOS, then it's $10. So that's the deal. Either $15 new or $10 as an upgrade from one of the older books.
That's great. That recognizes this is a new title, but also gives a break to the people who have previously taken your advice on Mail.
Right.
Good deal.
There's not a whole lot of overlap. There's some overlap, but mainly we want to say, thanks for being a loyal customer. Here's something I should also mention that if you purchased either of my previous Mail books since Mavericks and iOS 7 were released, then you get a free update. So we do grandfather you in.
Great. Joe, we will have you back not too distant future to talk about what all you're doing at Macworld iWorld. So I want to make
Quite
sure.
A lot.
Yeah. Well, that's not exactly a new thing, but I want to make sure to tell the listeners and viewers to pay attention, because we will be doing that as part of the Road to Macworld. But
yes, and if you're planning to be there, come see me. Come say hello, and I'll autograph your iPad screen or whatever. And love to meet listeners.
And you'll have a couch?
I will see what I can do about that.
Good. Before we go, is anything else bothering you? Anything else you want to get off your chest?
Well, I've had this rash.
No. It's family show. Family show. No, we'll leave that on the table for now.
I think we've covered enough for one day.
Joe, it's great to see you. Thanks for the time. We'll look forward to talking to you again real soon about Macworld iWorld.
All right, sounds good.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. Go and get Joe's book. Take control of your Apple Mail if that's your choice. And if you don't know what you're doing with your mail, this is a good place to start. Check the show notes. I'll have links to follow Joe and me on Twitter, to everything Joe does, to everything I do, so you can find us 24/7, 365 if you really want to. Until the next time, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, app.net, Google+, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, the MacVoices Dispatch, to stay up to date with all the latest MacVoices news from our front page or at MacVoices.com/newsletter. Advertising and sponsorships handled by Backbeat Media at BackbeatMedia.com.